Right, well, it's time to get started on our next project here, which is my brother's 2012 FJ Cruiser Trail Teams Edition. And it's had a few upgrades already. Right now it's sitting on, I think it's a 2-inch coil spacer lift. It's got a Metal-Tech front bumper, Metal-Tech sliders and fenders. So I'm going to be addressing some suspension work on it now to get it up sitting and riding like it needs to. For the front end, we have all of these lovely parts. So this is a JD Fabrication kit that it's a plus 2 1/4 per side. Plus, I think it's a 0 to 3 inch lift, so it's going to be a little wider, a little taller. Plus, it has these just giant beefy A-arms. Got some nice brackets to go in the middle for replacing the original A-arm mounts. Stuff is pretty freaking beefy, so I think it should work out pretty well. Also have the cutest little ORI struts ever. I think these are an 8-inch travel, which with where they mount on this is going to be probably in the 15 to 16-inch travel at the wheel. So this thing should work out really well. Also got these axle shafts that are also from JD Fabrication. Use this just giant 934 CV. Gets a lot more angle and should be a lot stronger as well. For the rear, we've got these Metal-Tech replacement control arms. These are super beefy. There's also replacement coil springs. And then we have these Icon shocks. Those things are pretty beefy looking. So yeah, overall this thing's gonna ride and handle 100% better than what it is right now. All right, well, our first step here, I guess we'll get it up on the lift and start taking it apart. All right, so I'm getting into the tear down here. See, I've got the brakes off, got all the brake lines and ABS lines removed, and basically now just everything else comes off. So the shocks, springs, upper control arm, spindle, lower control arm, the skid plates, all of that is coming off now. So we'll get that all torn down and then see what we need to do to start putting it back together. All right, well, went ahead and got everything that needs to unbolt unbolted. So that's pretty much all of the suspension components come off of this thing. So now we're going to get in here and all of these AR mounts are going to get cut off. Probably going to take the bump stop mount as well. Get that all cut and ground down clean. And then that's all going to get replaced with these pieces here. So those are some heavier duty AR mounts. So, hey Rip, how you doing? You here to help? Good dog. All right, you're a good dog. You're so good. Alright, so after all the cutting and grinding, all of that fun, this is pretty much down to kind of a base level. You know, when the floor looks like that, you've been having a good time. So, just about ready to start working on getting the new A-arm brackets put in there. First thing I got to do though, the new CV that goes in here is so big that I actually am going to have to cut off a piece of this part of the frame right here. They actually give you a little piece to fill that in with. So I'm going to go ahead and get that cut off, get that piece welded in. And I've got that corner cut off of that bracket on the frame. You can kind of see got just enough clearance to fit that CV in there. So that's about the last thing I need to do before we put the new AR mounts on. So I'm going to go ahead and we'll pull that out of there and start getting those bolted into place. So on these AR mounts, you got this tab at the back here that actually bolts into an existing hole in the frame. It's what kind of locates everything. These other two tabs are where the skid plate bolts on. So I'll go ahead and get that bolted up onto that tab, get that on both sides, and kind of get everything started to be fit in place. So here you can see where that thing bolts up onto that section of the frame, and then kind of doesn't exactly put it where it needs to be, but it gets it in the area front to rear at least, so I can make some final adjustments from there. Also got this piece that bolts onto the front of that. I'm going to get that bolted into place too, but these tabs for the original skid plate are in the way, so I'm going to have to cut those off. So I'll get them cut, and then I'll get this piece bolted on there. Now I'm starting to get everything fit up in here. So on this side, this is all fitting up pretty well. Had to grind a little bit to make everything match up here. But that one's pretty well where it wants to be. You can kind of see where that and down in here are fitting tight up against the frame. So that's looking pretty good. So on the other side though, we're still got some fitment issues happening here. See, I've got some gap up here, so this still needs to go up, but I'm running into stuff over here, so I'm going to have to probably do a little grinding in there. And then this other tab that bolts on with this front cross member, it's running into that. Probably should have just cut that whole tab off of there instead of just cutting off the little threaded part on the bottom. But so now I'm going to cut that off of there, so I'll have to pull these off to get that done. And then yeah, just I think it's just going to be some fitting and grinding and fitting until it all sits the way it's supposed to. Well, after about 6 or 7 times of taking this side off and grinding it, putting it back on, taking it back off, grinding a little more, and back and forth, actually got it fitting pretty good. See this side, we got a nice tight fit in there. Got a pretty good tight fit through there. So that's all fitting like it's supposed to. The other side's still fitting pretty good, so that's where it's got to go. So ran into a couple of issues though along the way. First off, so if we can see up in there, that bolt hole does not line up at all. This one actually lined up pretty decent, but still a little tough getting a bolt in there. The biggest issue is right here. So this is with the tab for the skid plate to bolt to, and that is the front differential mount. So I'm gonna have to figure out, I might have to take the washer off of this and grind a notch into it to where this bolt can go up and still clear everything. If we ever have to pull that diff out, which we probably will at some point, it's going to make that a little interesting, but I think it should be doable. But just some minor little issues that popped up in this thing. But other than that, it's all coming together pretty well. So I went ahead and tacked these AR mounts into place. I pulled this front cross member off to give myself a little more room to work with. So I'm going to pull this bolt out of this differential mount, see if I can notch into this washer and probably into the rubber some in order to get this little captive nut up here to fit. So I'm going to drop that out and see what we can do. All right, so the little notch I took out of that. So with that little nut in place, that should fit kind of just like that. So get that bolted back down and should take care of that little problem. Well, now that I got everything in place, got this cross member all bolted back in, everything's looking like it's fitting like it should. So I'm going to go ahead and get this all welded up. Alright, so with all this welded up now, we're kind of left with this gaping hole in that cross member. So in order to stiffen that up a little bit, we've got this plate, which should, if I didn't screw things up too bad, slide in just like that. So we get that welded in, and that's about it for these AR mounts. So with the AR mounts all buttoned up, now we can kind of turn our attention up onto these shock towers. So the first thing we're going to have to do here is open up this hole. It goes to a 3 1/8 hole. In order to do that, I have this hole saw guide, so that'll bolt on top there, and then it uses that hole in the center to guide the hole saw where you need it to be. So we'll get that bolted on there and get that hole bored out. So here I've got them all fitted up into place. This also gives an opportunity to mark out right here where that flange on that shock tower needs to get trimmed off so that this arm can come down through its full range of motion. So now I can go ahead and get these tacked in, pull that A-arm back out, get everything welded up, and then probably throw some paint on this thing at this point. I think that's kind of the last of the welding, at least on the chassis. I went ahead and got everything all welded up and shot a bunch of black on it, so it's all looking pretty good here. That basically wraps up the whole chassis portion of this. So now I can start working on the other stuff that's got to bolt on here. And one of the parts that's got to bolt on here is these spindles, and they've got a little gusset kit to go with them. So that puts this kind of channel shaped piece over the outside of the spindle. It also has a plate up here where the upper ball joint bolts onto, and then there's this other little gusset plate here that goes down onto the steering arm. So got that all kind of fitted in place. So I'm going to go ahead and get that welded up, and that'll, once I get the other side done, that'll pretty much wrap up the welding portion of this, and I can start reassembly. Alright, so I got the spindle all welded up, painted, went ahead and bolted on the unit bearing and backing plate too, so that's all ready to go. So now I need to get this lower A-arm bolted in and figure out how that's all got to fit. Alright, well, that'll hold it there for now. So with the A-arm in there, you can see you got quite a bit of space in the mount there. That's basically so it can be adjusted like it is now to be forward. That moves the front wheels about an inch forward from where they would be stock, or it can be shoved to the back of the mount to put it in closer to a stock location. And now we got a stack of shims that we got to figure out how that's going to fit in there to take up all that space. All right, here you can see I got the shim pack in there on front and rear, so that's kind of locating it where we want it to be, which in this case is all the way forward, trying to gain as much clearance as we can. The other thing I kind of need to do, I've got the bolt here marked to this alignment cam, because the alignment cam on this side, this is keyed onto the bolt in one way, so those all need to line up and work together. So instead of trying to find that thing over and over again, I've got a mark so I know where that goes. So I also went ahead and installed the upper arm while I was here. So that's in. I think my next step is I need to get the axle in, and then I can get the spindle bolted on and start getting that all fit together. Well, it took a little more persuasion, but the axle's in there. And you kind of get an idea of the kind of angle that's capable of. It's pretty impressive. So I can stick the spindle on here and should be able to get the outer axle up into the unit bearing and kind of start to push all that up in there and see how it fits. And it's starting to look like a thing. So yeah, it's coming together. The only thing I need to check now is we're hearing from this JD Fabrication that there's a chance this axle may be a little too long. I guess they had issues with something being different on the FJ Cruisers versus the 4Runners and Tacomas. So I'm just going to have to cycle the suspension up and down and make sure it's all free. If there's an issue, we'll have to pull that axle shaft back out and send it back to them to get cut down. Okay, so with everything pretty much assembled together now, we can kind of see where we have a bit of an issue with this axle shaft. So apparently they're aware of a problem with the FJ Cruisers, that the axles they've got for the Tacomas and 4Runners actually wind up a little too long. So we're going to have to pull this axle back out and get it sent off to them to get fixed. You can see what's happening here. As the suspension cycles, it's binding up. You can kind of, I don't know if you can see or not, but it's binding up on the differential housing there. It's actually causing the housing to get pushed up as this shaft bottoms out in the CV. So I'll pull that back out, get those sent back to them, get it fixed. It's going to slow things down a little bit, but I can probably work on other things in the meantime. So I'm going to get that pulled out, and I'll probably get the other side as assembled as I can until we get these axle shafts back in. Well, I got the old axles out, so I've got everything kind of disassembled at this point. There's not a whole lot more I can do on the front until I get the new axles in, so I think I'm going to go ahead and turn my attention to the rear, start getting that put together, show you what we got going on. So here in the rear we've got these Metal-Tech control arms and coil springs to replace the originals. There's also a set of Icon shocks. You're going to go in there. Should give this thing quite a bit more travel in the rear than what it had previously. So I think our first step is to go ahead and get these control arms swapped out. So I'll start working on pulling out the stock ones. Here you can see the difference between the stock lower control arms and the aftermarket ones we're putting in. There's just quite a bit of beef here, so help keep this all together. Now I just need to match the lengths between the stock one and the one we're putting in and get that thing dropped in there, and then I'll do the other side. So in order to match the lengths, I just took the bolts out, stick it through so that it runs through both arms. Got the same thing down here. So with that fitting in there, I know that they're at least pretty close to the right length. So I can go ahead and get that dropped in. I think before I do, I'm going to give them a couple squirts of grease, just because I think these grease zerks are going to be a little difficult to get to on either end. So grease them up a little bit before I put them in, and then we'll get them dropped in there. Okay, so I got both of those lower control arms in. Got these nuts tightened up, hold that in place. And I got to say that was probably one of the easiest upgrades I've ever done on anything. Next step, I guess we need to get the stock shocks out of there so I can drop the axle out, get the stock coils out. I'm going to have to unhook the brake lines, start getting that all disconnected so I can get the new shocks and springs and brake lines in there. Went ahead and got the axle supported up on these stands. Got myself plenty of thread on those things sticking out, so when I take the shocks off, I should be able to drop the whole axle down far enough that those stock coils should be able to pop out of there. Hopefully I'll have enough room to get the new coils in, so they are quite a bit longer than what's in there now. Okay, so I wound up having to loosen up these upper links in order to get the axle to want to drop out far enough to get the coils out. And you see I've got them out now. Just found out we're getting new ones of these too, upgraded, so didn't really cost myself anything with having to loosen them up. But now we can kind of start working on getting the new shocks and springs in. And here you can see the difference between the stock springs and the ones that are going in. You can see you got a nice dual rate set up on these. Should make it ride pretty decent. And also you can kind of see there's a lot more than 3 inches difference between the height of those springs, even though they're a 3-inch lift spring, because this softer section down here is going to soak up quite a bit of that length when you set the weight of the rig on it. So let's work on seeing how those fit in there, and then I think I can go ahead and get the shocks put in there too and start seeing how it all goes together. Okay, so I think first thing I'm just going to try and jam this shock up in there, see how that fits. See if I can get that pin in the top. Yeah. Right on there like that. Okay, well, it's about as easy as it could be. See if I can get the bushing and everything on this pin, and that'll be pretty good to go. And I should be able to get this reservoir, should mount something like that. See how that works. So with the shock installed in here, I thought I'd show you something else that I did. You can see right here, I've got this lip kind of bent out. Gives a lot better access into that nut on the shock. And instead of just kind of beating it around, I gradually work that thing around until it's a nice even lip. Looks pretty decent, so it makes it a lot easier to get to that nut. So I was struggling with that before I bent that out. So you can kind of see where that reservoir is also going to mount. And I have to come up with some brackets to attach to the frame there that I can tie it onto. But yeah, should work. All right, so after I got those shocks installed, you can see I still need to mount those reservoirs, but there's more to come before that. We also had the new upper control arms come in, so I went ahead and got those stuffed in there. Those are a lot beefier than the skinny little thing that was in their stock. So the next thing we need to address is bump stops. So the kit that the springs and shocks and everything came with had a bracket to just drop this down, but I think we can do better than that. And this is what I mean by do better than that. So these were originally part of the front kit, but with the ORIs having built-in bump stops, we're not going to need to use these anymore. So I think, so we cut all the brackets and everything off for the stock ones, we'll attach them right there, and that should make it so we've got all kinds of cool guy parts on here. And so our first step in getting the air bumps in there is we're going to have to unbolt the factory bump stops, and then I'm going to cut off all of those brackets and everything, get it down to smooth frame there. So I've got a nice clean surface to work from. But for now, we'll go ahead and get these out of here. And then I can get to cutting. So with the old bump stops all cut off and the frame cleaned up, I'm going to go ahead and drop this down, get the suspension to full compression, probably leave a 1/4 inch or so of shaft showing, and that'll tell me where I want to set the air bumps at. So that's about where I want this to sit. Gives me a little bit of leeway for a little extra compression that may happen for whatever reason. So now I can kind of see where that air bump's got to sit. So it's going to go in here something like this. So now I just need to come up with some sort of brackets to attach that mount onto the frame. We get that welded up. That shouldn't be too difficult to do. Should just maybe even just some strips of flat bar that might fit in there. Yeah, see what I come up with. So this is what I came up with for mounting the cans for these bump stops. This is just was a piece of 2-inch square tube. Just slid off that end, and I'll just weld that up to that can, and then this will give me a nice surface to weld that to the frame. I think it should work out pretty well. Okay, I think that's where that's going to go. Pretty much centered on the axle, straight up and down. And it's going to work. So I'll get the other side tacked on. Then I have to raise everything up so I can drop these out to finish welding them. But right now, so I'll get the other side tacked on. Okay, so we got the bump cans all welded up. So as soon as those cool down, they'll be ready for paint. And it's pretty much just a matter of assembling the rest of the pieces back here. And here it is all ready to go. So we got bump stops installed, got them charged up, got the reservoirs for the shocks mounted. So the only thing left to do now is to try to wrestle the coils up in there. So I'll see how that goes. All right, that one wasn't too bad. The other one might be a little more difficult though. Yeah. I have quite the room to work with over here. Okay. I have to come up with something else here. So there we've got both coils in. This one over here on the driver's side was a little more difficult to deal with. It's just not enough room to work with. We'll end up having to compress the coil with a couple ratchet straps and then hold on to that bomb while I put it in there. So it always makes things a little bit more exciting. So that basically wraps up the rear suspension, other than tightening up a few of these bolts that I had to loosen on the links to get everything to go where I needed it to be. So I think I'm going to lower it down, at least onto the stands a little bit, get everything about to where pretty close to where ride height's going to be anyway, and then I'll get all those tightened up. So I got everything tightened up back here. So suspension wise, this is all good to go. I'm still going to have to bleed the brakes, but I got to do that on the front too when I get those brake lines swapped out. So we're going to wait until probably the last thing I do. Next thing I got to do back here is we're going to be adding a little armor to the rear end here. So we get marked out where this has got to go, get the paint sanded off. I need to get the diff drained so I don't cook the oil in there when I weld this on. And then we'll get this thing put on there. That's pretty much the end of it for the rear end. So that's the rear end basically done. Get that thing welded up, painted, got oil in the diff, so everything back here is ready to go. So now I can get my focus back up onto the front end, start getting that put back together. Well, good news, the axle shaft showed back up, so I went ahead and got this side kind of reassembled, at least loosely. Everything seems to be fitting like it should. So now I'm just gonna make sure I get full travel out of it, and then I can kind of continue on getting limit straps and shock mounts done. Okay, well this thing's pretty much sitting at full droop right now, so it should go all the way up. Yep. So we're getting full travel out of it. No binding on the axle shaft anymore. So yeah, I think we're good to go. I can get the rest of the suspension set up here, get the ORIs put in, limit straps. This thing will be getting a lot closer to done. Alright, well I went ahead and got these mounts for the limit straps welded on. These are actually kind of cool. You can see they've got kind of a big oval hole in them, and that's because they've got these little, if I can hold on to it, little keys that go in there. You can see the holes offset in that, so you can put it in that way, flip it around that way, depending on whether you want longer or shorter focus. There's also another one that has the hole in the center, so there's really 3 different positions that you can set up these limit straps in. I've got it set up right now all the way down, so it'll be in there kind of like that. And if I need to, I can flip this one around or use the other little, they call it chip, to kind of fine tune where the limit strap's going to end up at. So I think I'll go ahead and get those bolted in and be done with that part. So now with the limit straps all mounted up and done, I need to work on getting those ORIs mounted in there. So in order to do that, I'm going to have to get those misalignment spacers turned down. You can see they're a long ways off. These I think are just under 1 5/8 inches, and the width on here is about 1 1/4 inches. So I'm going to have to narrow this up in order to fit inside here. Normally, being that narrow might be a bit of a problem, but being on a independent rig, there's not going to be a whole lot of twist this way in it. It's going to be just rotating back and forth that way. So should work fine. Alright, you can see now with those turned down, fits up inside these brackets. It fortunately doesn't leave much of a shoulder for things to clamp up against, but I think in this application it should work just fine. You can also see there's not a lot of room for misalignment there either. But again, there really shouldn't be very much misalignment with this setup. So get these things popped in there and see how it fits. Alright, so I got these mounting brackets all bolted up on there. These are actually upside down to what they're intended to be. So normally this part would be down here. This whole thing would shove up through the shock tower on the frame. But by flipping these over like this, it winds up bringing in the ORI's internal bump stop right where it needs to be. So this is how we're going to run them. So I'm going to go stick them in there and see how that looks. So I got the ORI in on this side. It's a little more difficult to deal with than what I was anticipating. These top bolts up here are a little rough to get to with the shock already mounted in there, especially the one at the back, which I still don't have a nut on yet because I haven't figured out how to do that, but we'll get that figured out. So with that in there, I went ahead and got the brakes on as well so I can get the new brake line put in. And now I've got enough space that I can kind of figure out where this reservoir's got to mount. It's going to go kind of something like that. And so it's going to need hose to go kind of straight up and over that A-arm. So I'm going to put a 90 on that fitting on the ORI, and I'm pretty sure that should work. So this is what that 90 is going to look like. So I should be able to come straight up out of this with the hose over the top of that A-arm. It should clear everything just fine. All right, so I got all my hoses and fittings and everything in so I can get this all assembled. I did take the swivel off of this end just because I think that's going to work out better. It saves me about 1 inch of length there, just using a standard hose, 24-inch hose. I also came up with a better way to get that bolt in there, so that's now just welded in so I don't have to try to get to the back side of it and just come in on the top. So now I'm ready to stick that all back in there. I got to come up with mounts for the reservoir. Shouldn't be too difficult to do. Yeah, we're getting close. All right, so with the ORI mounted in there, I just got to get the reservoir mount on. Kind of got myself a mark there about where it's got to sit. So I'm just going to take some of these, get those welded onto the frame, and I can get some hose clamps, get that thing mounted up, and that part is done. All right, so with all the major parts on now, work on trying to get at least an initial alignment on it. Just good enough to get it to the alignment shop anyway. So got these angle iron pieces set up on both sides, tape measures, kind of run between them so I can get my toe set. And then I've also got my angle meter there, give me a camber. See, I'm actually not too far off from zero camber right now, so I might tweak that a little bit. But so yeah, I can also kind of sight down that angle iron and see, where I end up in relation to the rear axle. That should give me a pretty good idea of whether or not I'm pointed straight or not. So like I said, I can get it close enough that it'll drive decent to get to the alignment shop and get the final alignment done. So I'm going to make some tweaks on that, and then we'll worry about getting the sway bar put on. I think that's about the last step before I get the ORIs charged up and get this thing sitting on its own weight. All right, so I've got my kind of initial alignment setup done. Got it set to basically zero camber at ride height, so that should at least make it drivable for a little bit anyway. Also got the initial charge in the ORIs, got the sway bar put on, so front end's basically done. Just got to get brakes bled all the way around since I put new brake lines on everything. But other than that, this thing's just about ready to get tires on it and see how it sits. All right, well, I've got the brakes bled, the tires on. I think I'm ready to set this thing down on the ground and see what it looks like, see what my initial pressure in the ORIs is looking like. It probably going to need some adjustment, but good enough place to start. Also got on the ground here That's a couple of pieces of plastic that are lubed up against each other, because I'm hoping that when the tire sits down on that, it's going to want to move in and out. Hopefully those two will slide and just let it do what it needs to do. So we'll find out here. Well, obviously that front needs way more pressure than that. Okay, so now I've doubled the pressure on the ORI, so we'll see what that does for us. Okay, well, that's still not getting us there. Wow. All right, so after adding some oil to the ORIs in front, I've got it sitting pretty much where I want it. The rear's still sitting a little bit high, but I think that's just because those springs are probably needing to be broken in for a little while. I think it'll probably settle down. So yeah, I got everything kind of buttoned up and ready to go. So I think it's about time to pull it out and give it a test drive. So after a quick first test drive, got it back here on the rack, ran into a little bit of a problem. So if we can see here. So right here, this steering joint where it bolts onto the rack is just making contact with the new axle. You kind of see it's got a little bit of a shiny spot going around it. So what I'm hoping for is if I can make the rack space up maybe 1/8 of an inch would be enough to give me that clearance. So I'm going to unbolt it, see if I can get it lifted up a little bit, get a shim underneath it. All right, so I actually wound up spacing down the diff mount by 1/8 of an inch or so. You can kind of see the little spacer in there. Did that on both sides. So now I can come around and I've got just enough clearance that nothing hits anymore. And nothing should be getting any closer than it is right now. So I think that's going to work. So get the tire and skid plate back on and we'll take it out and try it again. All right, well, taking her down a little bit of a semi-rough dirt road anyway. And this thing is eating up the bumps, no problem at all. So yeah, that's working pretty good at sucking up all these. So I think I'm gonna take it back up, probably do a quick little nut and bolt, and I think this thing is pretty much good to go. I can give it back to my brother and let him go tear it up for a while. So I think that's gonna be the end of this project.